Hello, good morning. Today is the fifth day of the Global Fact 7 and actually the last day of our public track. It's been a wonderful ride for the whole fact-checking community, and today we are fortunate to have this first of the opening sessions of the day along with my dear friend Ferdi, which by the way, we are sitting 6 feet apart from each other in our headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida. And on the other side of the screen, we have Peter Cunliffe-Jones, the senior advisor of the International Fact-Checking Network, and the mastermind and architecture behind our Code of Principles update and review. So it's great to have you here, Peter. How are you?
I'm a little bit fuzzy-headed this morning. I must admit. I have to apologize for that. But yeah, I'm good. I'm champion.
That's
I think.
great. Yes, today is actually we are celebrating two different things today. First of all, we are celebrating the championship of Liverpool after 30 years, which is the team of Peter and probably many around the world. And also we are celebrating the winners of the Global Fact 7. Today we are also announcing the winners of this year's Global Fact Awards, which are Rappler, the Washington Post, and Taiwan Fact Check Center for their tremendous work throughout this year. So we celebrate these three organizations along with the rest of the community, and you, Peter, for the championship that came after 30 years. How do you feel?
Well, I think my personal role in Liverpool's victory might be a little bit overplayed, but no, it's fantastic what Liverpool have done, and it's fantastic what football I think can do for communities. We always talk at IFCN about community, and that's what
Right.
Liverpool is all about.
That's great. So speaking of the community, I encourage everyone to tune into our social media accounts to join us to celebrate our winners for the Global Fact, and also celebrate the winners of this year, Rappler, the Washington Post, and the Taiwan Fact Check Center. And while we all do that, I would also like to also turn the floor to Peter and ask him to walk us through the process that we have gone through with our Code of Principles, which you are all very familiar with, which constitutes the core and the bulk of our work to vet the organizations in this community and help to promote higher standards in the fact-checking field by having them adhere to higher standards, which we will be hearing more about today. And when Peter's presentation is over, we will be opening the floor for questions. So please feel free to join the discussion either on our YouTube channel or on our Twitter channels or the Slack workspace. And I will be doing my best to address some of those questions to Ferdi and to Peter in London. So thank you so much for joining. And now, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, well, so thanks very much to everybody who's looking in. As I said, I apologize if I'm a little bit fuzzy-headed this morning. It was quite a late one last night. There's a slightly serious point to my wearing what is, for some people, a possibly slightly provocative scarf, which is that there are areas of partisanship that the IFCN Code of Principles don't cover. Football allegiances are one, and there's a reason for that. So thanks very much to Baybars and Ferdi for allowing me to wear that. So could we have the first slide? That's great. Back in March, for people who still remember March, I'm not quite sure I do, we published our new Code of Principles. The plan here today is to take everybody through why it matters, what the code is for, the changes that we agreed as a community, and how the code now works. For those who have recently joined us, I thought I should first set out a very brief history. So fact checkers met in 2014 and 2015 in London. We were a very diverse group of organizations, different goals, different ideas about fact-checking, different practices, verification, political fact-checking, different opinions. By the time we met in Buenos Aires in 2016, and we'd agreed on the need for code, a basic set of standards that we felt we could all adhere to. And it was launched later that year. And the first system of verification was introduced just a few months later in February of 2017. Since then, what's happened, the community has grown. In fact, it's grown even since I put up this slide, and it's now more than 90 signatories, either verified or in renewal, I believe. And so with that growth, we wanted to keep on developing the code. We needed to do that to enable people to work in the context, for the code to work in the context that our fact checkers work in. Why does that matter? Well, the first answer is shown by this slide. It shows the scale of fact checking and of the IFCN community today. It shows that we have fact checking organizations in countries where there are two-party political systems, multi-party democracies, countries dominated by one main political party, countries hostile to the very concept of democratic accountability. We need to work with organizations with a very different focus of operations. So, as a panel discussed on Wednesday, some focus on political fact-checking, some focus on verification. A significant number do both, and the different types of organization and activities vary widely, and we need to take account of that in the revamp of the code. So, what do we need it for? Who needs the code? So, they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I'm not sure that, in fact, that's the word I'd use if you look at what you see on the screen. So for those who don't recognize them, these are partisan publishing operations run by political parties and politicians and activists in the UK, in Mexico, in the Czech Republic, blatant attempts to imitate fact checkers in Sweden, and a government-funded fact checker in Cameroon. It calls itself the biggest fact-checking site in Cameroon, and it's government-funded. If fact-checking is to mean anything, it has to be done impartially. That's the key promise of the IFCN code and the badge, and that's how we distinguish ourselves from these imitators. Why do people? Why do we need? If we need that to distinguish ourselves from them, why does the public need us to have code? I think the second answer is one of principle, because we do weigh judgments in the balance. The public and partners should be able to scrutinize us too. If the influence of fact-checking is growing, and it is, then it's right that we are held to account, and that's what the code is about. It's a point of principle. Why then is the code needed? Why do we need the code? It's about trust. So on the one side, it's distinguishing us from others. On the other side, it's properly holding us accountable. The third element is trust. If we want to be trusted today, we need to ensure that users can see and understand how the organizations operate and don't have to take their word, our word on trust. That's what a large part of the code is about. We want to ensure that fact checks are done in a way that, sorry, can we go back 1 second? We want to ensure that the code, sorry, can we go back 1 slide? Okay, so is it possible to go back 1 slide? If not, doesn't matter. I will say I'll make the point anyway. We need to ensure that fact checkers, that the users can replicate the fact checks themselves, and to assist fact checkers through that to earn and merit trust. Thank you. Right. So before I talk about what we changed, I think I should first say what a remarkable thing I think the code is. It was created just 4 years ago by a very small group of people. It's today adopted by more than 90 organizations and many partners around the world. And it's a remarkable success that I think a lot of the credit for should go to IFCN teams past and present. But you only improve any organization by working out your weaknesses, and the code of course has those. So in July, after the meeting in Cape Town, we polled our signatories and assessors for your opinions, and we came up with this series of challenges. Inconsistency in how assessments were made, a lack of baseline standards, contrasting standards between fact-checking units and their parent media, and some practical problems for fact-checkers in hostile environments, difficulties for assessors in getting hold of the information that they wanted, and the lack of a clear process for responding when we see violations of the code. All of these things rightly undermine trust in the organization, and we agreed the need to tackle those weaknesses. What has not changed are the principles themselves. Non-partisanship, transparency of sources, transparency of funding, transparency of methodology, and an open and honest corrections policy. We kept all of those, but agreed to add baseline standards and new criteria of how to assess them in ways that we believe work around the world. So what we did, we asked the community what you wanted from this review, and these are the answers. In summary, that the IFCN badge is the best guarantee you can have, not perfect, but the best you can have of work done to a high standard, work that is focused on public interest issues, and we have definitions of that. Work that is an assessment system that is at the same time flexible enough to allow for organizations to operate as they need, but also rigorous and fair enough to ensure the principles are applied, and that's done not on the basis of a gotcha culture. We're not trying to trip anybody up, but trying to look for patterns of practice, make the assessments consistent, and do that in a rigorous way. We recognize that this is difficult, and so through the appointment of Ferdi's position and the strengthening of the IFCN, we are providing support to assessors and to applicants. And that's part of that is the workshops that are coming next week. So some detail then on the changes that we did make. There are some very detailed guidelines which you can find on the IFCN website. I'm not going to go through those. These are just a few highlights. Eligibility to be an IFCN member. We looked to give the assessors more to work with, a longer period of work for the assessors to test. Finding ways to ensure that the claims that signatories have focused on public interest issues. That was a demand of the community. That organizations are editorially independent of the state and political control. Funding is one issue, but editorial independence is another. Non-partisanship, a review of the work that's done. It's a more rigorous review than before. Focusing on, as a rule, on the reach and importance of claims that are checked. Declaring people's sources, ensuring that the applicants themselves, the organizations, don't take policy positions on issues they fact check, and that staff do not overall show what a reasonable person would view as meaning that in their social media output or in the statements that they make or campaigning that they do would take as meaning that the organization as a whole is editorially biased. What I'd say here is that to ask everybody who's planning to apply or to reapply this year or next, please do, I mean, hopefully not right now, but maybe next week, take a really good look through the guidelines. They are on the site. They are detailed. They were voted on by the community, mostly with 80% plus support. This is our code, the community's code, but to be fair to users, to readers, to everybody, they will and must be applied to all. So please do look through these in detail. For the principles on sources and funding, there's more detail, there's more criteria and more rigor. And this time I really will zip through it because, well, you can all read. And so those are the changes for sourcing and for funding. And we can have lots of questions about those, I'm sure. And so finally, to standards of methodology and an honest and open corrections policy. I think it's really important to understand one of the changes that we made with this code was the introduction of baseline standards around sourcing and baseline standards around methodology. Why do we do that? Because it's not just important that we are non-partisan, but it's important the quality of the work we all do. So trying to get things right and correcting when we make mistakes. I'd also emphasize the point about requiring that media who operate fact-checking units apply the same standards for corrections as the fact-checking units. This has been an issue not in one, but in many countries that's been raised by lots of people. So nearly there. How should this be applied in practice? As I said earlier, and we can come back to this, we are trying to be more transparent about the assessments and the assessors who make them, more rigorous with more criteria. We've increased the number of criteria by which we seek to assess adherence to those 5 principles, those 5 unchanged principles, with more criteria. We're doing testing, asking the assessors to do testing of randomized samples of fact checks, testing randomized samples of social media output. These things that were somewhat taken on trust previously, we are seeking to test. Applicants pass or fail on criteria. Previously, we had partially compliant and nobody really seemed to understand what that meant. We want this, though, to be a fundamentally fair process. So there's a process for appeals to the board where the organization, the applicant, disagrees with the assessment made by the assessor. And we're encouraging more openness about the whole process for the applicant's readers. It's fundamental that this process should be understood and available in their own language to the people who read and use the site. And very often that's not been the case. So I'll go back to my very first question about why it matters, why the code matters. I think the point is that if you look around the world at the moment, we see that asking people to take an organization on trust alone, as this climate seems to be doing, is really a pretty precarious position to be in. That's why before you leap, you need guidelines. And for real trust of those guidelines, you want those guidelines verified. So I'm happy to say that this is something the IFCN board members practice, don't just preach, as Laura Zommer was happy to demonstrate a few months ago. Baybars, back to you.
Thank you, Peter. And it was great to have the presentation ending with Laura's aerobic exercises. And I guess she always has been an inspiration for the community, but I think we have, more to learn from her, and that video, I think, is a testament for this, need for learning from Laura. So thanks a lot for sharing that. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm trying to prioritize them based on the structure of this panel, but I think it makes sense for our audience to hear from Ferdi, our program manager of the IFCN, how the application process takes place. So, Ferdi, first of all, welcome to the IFCN.
Thank you, Baybars.
How long it's been?
It feels like it's been 2 years, but it's been only 2 months.
True. So Ferdi has been with us in the last couple of months. He's been here for 2 months, and he has been he's been taking over the Code of Principles day-to-day active applications. So that will be really useful for us, Ferdi, if you can just walk us through the process from the beginning to the end. What do the applicants need to do? How they can reach out to the application, and what are the steps they need to take into account?
Sure. As you know, as Peter explained, the Code of Principles, the
philosophy.
Well, this is what happens when you live abroad for 10 years and then you move back to the States. Your language isn't there as it used to be. Well, my part of the Code of Principles is taking you through each step of the process along the way, from the very beginning, once you sign up on the Code of Principles site, to the very end, and hopefully a good ending where you become a signatory of the IFCN. The process starts with our communication between the organizations, with individuals around the world. This is the most exciting part for me. I get to meet everybody from the community. It brings a little communication between us. It makes us closer. It makes me understand who you are, who the organization is as a whole. And the most important thing is for us to guide you along the way, and I'm going to be there at every step. As we start, my advice to all new applicants, reapplicants, is to really look at the guidelines we provide on the Code of Principles website. These guidelines are basically your template to move forward with the application process. And when you have any questions regarding any of these guidelines, make sure to reach out to me. I would say the most important eligibility criteria of the Code of Principles is the time that you've been fact-checking. Just note, when you're going through those guidelines, there's a section in the guidelines where it states if there's 5 or more organizations in the IFCN code as a signatory, you would have to be fact-checking for at least 12 months. If it's less than 5, it's 6 months. So please be careful of that. After you sign on, you will see an application page. Before you start your application, I'm going to go through each step with the workshops. If you haven't signed up for it, make sure you signed up for it. If you haven't received an email, make sure you email me so I could send you a sign up for those workshops. Once you are on that application page, make sure you understand each question before you answer them. I would say take notes, reference to the guidelines, look at your websites. The best case scenario is to get all of this application done at one shot, but of course it never happens that way. We communicate with each other back and forth to get things right before and during and after during the application process. So it's going to be a rigorous email communication. So make sure you look at those emails, and then let's stay on top of it. Sometimes I've been lagging behind at the moment because of the global facts, so I apologize for that. But I'll be back on track after the global fact. You make sure you check your emails. So after you apply, the application is sent to the board, and once the board ratifies your application, you will be getting a congratulation email from me. And that email will welcome you to we're a huge family, so welcome to the family.
Yeah. Thank you. A couple of questions will be also about some of the tips that probably the prospect applicants are looking at. But there's a question for you, Peter. So we have probably spent some time all together in the last couple of months, probably in the last year, to figure this out all together. But how we define bad actors is a question that came up a couple of times. So the whole application process is basically a bit more than just a set of quantitative analysis done by our assessors and us. So in areas like bad actors, I know this is a question that we also have had some time to cope with in the past as well. Would you like to take that one, Peter?
Sure. I mean, I think so. I think that's reasonably straightforward in a sense, in that I think that it's organizations that conceal information that is required for the under the application process, or present misleading information. So, I mean, it's in fact deliberately present misleading information about the process. What we're asking for through the code is straightforward information that explains the organization, so that the users, because this is fundamentally about enabling users and partners of all of these organizations to trust them. So if the people behind an organization seek to conceal who they are, seek to distort our understanding, the public's understanding of who they are, then there's a problem there. And I mean, a major part of the verification process is by far the largest and the most important part of the process is a review of the content of the work that the organization does itself. And so that's for the assessor to look at, and not taken on trust, but looked at. So that is a pretty straightforward process. If there is information that's concealed, that's distorted, that's a bad actor.
Thank you, Peter. And speaking of the assessors, I think we can also spend a couple of minutes to discuss how we reach out to the assessors as well. So right now, Ferdi can fact check me on that one as well, but I think we have 130 assessors right now in the pool of assessors. And in some cases, when we receive an application from a country where we don't necessarily have an assessor, what is the process that we do to find out the assessors in that country to match the application with?
Right. So that's probably the funnest part of my job, is seeking out new people to join our broader community. It's I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm not going to say it's very difficult, because it's a process of me trying to understand each individual as well. Like the assessors trying to dig deeper into your applications, I am at the same time, and with the reference with Baybars, constantly looking at individuals in countries where applicants are coming from, who we feel that are able to grasp the code of principles, internalize it, and use it as their guiding point for assessing these applications. I generally try to do individuals who have been in the journalist field for a long time. I seek out academics who are in the schools of journalism in their universities. But also I do use our community as well when I'm reaching out to assessors, because our community is a strong network where they would know individuals who reside in certain parts of the world that would be able to help us with this endeavor.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Dulce, who used to be in your shoes.
Is it for me?
A friend and a colleague. She's raising this question, which is very important, I think. And I think that also constitutes one of the reasons why we have gone through this whole auditing and review process. She's asking how we had did our best at least to address this, consistency problem with the assessors, because in some cases we have seen in the past that assessors, well, same organizations had different, results, and we had to do different, assessors just to make sure in the past, and that was mostly due to the fact that the assessors were taking different, priorities from the guideline, and also maybe, focusing on different areas while, overlooking at others. So the review and the whole, update on our criteria was a attempt to address this. Peter, I would be more than happy to hear you walking us through again with the philosophy, the whole change, and why we have come up with this, long and thorough, process, this guideline, probably to more to help the assessors, right?
Yeah, I think that's so, because when we did the survey, we didn't only talk to signatories, we also talked to lots of the assessors as well. I think we're trying to do two or three things, and I mean, Dulce's put a finger on an issue there. So the first is that we have increased the number of criteria that organizations have to adhere to, or are assessed on, for these 5 principles, from 12 to 31. And so that's it. There was a lot of previously there was a lot of room within the guidelines that could, as you said, could be interpreted very, very differently from one organization from one method to another. So the increase in the detail is trying to increase consistency. There's also there's almost a more of a, in a sense, of a template of information that assessments we're trying to get the assessments through in, so that there's a greater consistency there. And so part of what Ferdi's doing is to look at the assessments as they come in, and to see, well, hold on, so in this case, this organization is said to be non-compliant, but that's generally we say that's compliant, or vice versa. So there's a consistency there. At the same time, we're very conscious, and it was feedback from the community demonstrated again, that the circumstances that organizations work in varies enormously. So you'll see if you go through the guidelines, there's a lot of places where we say that these are where there are judgment calls to be made by the assessors, taking into account the news context and the political context of that country. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It attempts to take into account the differences between the Philippines and Argentina, or South Africa and Norway, but it also attempts to standardize to the extent that we can the pros. So there's a balance there, and we hope we get it right.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question that actually was one of the first questions in this session, and I'm trying to keep a track of all those questions at the same time, so hopefully I'm not missing any of those. So there's this question about the renewing applicants, and whether the assessments will be tougher and stricter for the new and for the renewing applicants. If they fail to meet those principles, what is the process? So maybe I can take this from a perspective of the complaints, because I think one of the things that we have spent so much time on this process is our complaints policy. I mean, while we don't see ourselves as in traffic cop, where to punish and write tickets to the organizations who fail to meet our standards, we really value the integrity of our code of principles. So we have a very active and a functioning complaints policy where we collect complaints from readers, because as Peter also has pointed out during his presentation, our goal is to basically help and encourage and empower users to fact check the fact checkers. Because if there's any one slogan that has been very popular among the fact checkers, is that who will fact check the fact checkers? And I think that answer to that question is the users, the readers. So in renewing applications, our system, the new system updated in March, keeps a track of every complaint that we receive on IFCN at IFCN Code of Principles.pointer.org, and those complaints are matched with the assessors prior to the renewing applicants fill out their application form. So every assessor is now able to, well, it's not able, they are basically required to go through every complaint that we receive and mark them as resolved or point out the concerns that they might have about those complaints. Otherwise, the renewing applicants may not be able to get the vetting process sorted out. So that's a very important process that I think we also need to address for the new applicants and for the renewing applicants as well. Ferdi, maybe I can, ask you this. What is the ratio that you see, like the breakdown that you see regionally across different regions in terms of the new applications that we receive? We also already know, like the IFCN now has 92 verified signatories from 54 different countries. But when you take a look at the new applications, and you don't need to just focus on whether they will be accepted or not, but
Right.
the broader scope of applications, where do you think we get the most applications?
I mean, since I started working on the Code of Principles, it's been a process of renewal applications and new applications. And the new applications are coming in tremendously. I mean, fact checking is only getting bigger. The most, I would say, organizations from Southeast Asia, India, Southeast Asia is the hotspot right now. It's where most of our applications are coming from. There are a lot of applications from Africa, which is very very great. I mean, Southeast Asia and Africa, I would say, are our current hotspots where applications are coming from.
That's very interesting because I mean our latest set of the fact checkers report also points out a very similar rise in the number of fact checking organizations in Southeast Asia, and also just closely followed by and that the Duke Reporters Lab census also points out the same finding. The more organizations are fact checking in Southeast Asia and also in South America as well. And our State of the Fact Checkers report also points out that more and more larger media houses, organizations also launch fact-checking units. And Peter, there's a question that I think we can merge with this observation and ask you to share your take on. More organizations now start fact-checking under larger media houses. And one of the core goals that we had in the Code of Principles, maybe not in the early days, but in at least definitely in the review process, is to how to handle or how to offer the same set of criteria, both to standalone, startup, new, independent fact-checking organizations, and also to the ones that operate under larger media houses. And we also had some feedback during our review. What has been the most striking part of this challenge for you so far?
Well, I think there's two. So there's two areas really where we've tried to touch on with that. So we, first of all, the code recognizes the fact that almost every media house in the world is seen as being partisan one way or another. And it doesn't, by a certain part of their community, whatever the country is, whatever the region is, that's a generalized perception of most media houses. And that's fine, that's what they do. They publish opinion pieces and so on. And so we've always distinguished between the work that the media house does in its editorial columns and its opinion columns, and the work that the fact-checking unit does. But there were, so one area where we had a lot of progress in this, we've introduced the criteria that, right, so in your opinion columns you say whatever you want, but if a media house wants to have the kudos that it gets, and today perhaps the bucks that it gets from running a fact-checking organization, then they need to adhere to the principle of accuracy. And so that's why there's this new element in the code that the assessor has to look at the corrections policy, the policy around honest and open corrections at media house, so that you don't have a situation where a media house is churning out misinformation and the fact-checking unit is publishing fact checks of misinformation. It makes no sense in the minds of the public. It's not advancing accuracy in public debate. So that's the first thing. And so in those fields, then we treat everybody the same. The area that is much more complex is finance. So a lot of organizations are the fact-checking units set up by big, complex companies, and establishing some of those are private companies, some of them have complex structures and so on. So since the start, and that continues today, we demanded different criteria, adherence to different criteria around financial transparency. So fact-checking units are the units of a media house. They have to state the ownership so that the public can know the ownership. Often the accounts of that media house or research company or whatever it might be are public, but that isn't something that we have the legal position to require.
Sure. Yeah, this is, and actually, I mean, this is a bigger challenge when you take into account that the code tries to apply, and it already applies to more than 54 different countries, and you don't have the same legal and also the the economic, the culture and the rules in those countries. So whatever you have to come up with needs to be also applicable in in different countries. And one of the things that I think is important to address here is that only 10 organizations are signatory to IFCN's Code of Principles from the United States, while we have 13 from India. So the code is not particularly focusing on one country. It's a set of criteria that aims to be applicable in all around the world. So that challenge, as you have pointed out, becomes a bigger challenge, but also a bigger opportunity to offer more universal values and guidelines to the fact-checking field, while trying to address those issues. There's a question from Martin. He asks whether the new criteria, having a longer publishing track record, creates a disadvantage for fact checkers in countries where we have more fact checkers. So right now, the code asks applicants from the United States and India, particularly from those two countries, to have at least 12 months of publishing period. And for the record, that criteria went into effect as of the 1st of this month. So even though we have updated our Code of Principles back in last spring, we have waited this criteria to be in effect by the 1st of this month to give organizations some time to get ready for this new principle. So Peter, we had a couple of conversations with our community and with our advisory board and with all the stakeholders within the community. This is going to be a new criteria pretty much just for like a month almost to the organizations applying from those two countries. And probably in the next couple of months, we will be having another country or countries to be qualified for this 12-month publishing period. Would you like to give us some insights on how we see this as a way to increase or maybe focus on the quality rather than the quality?
Sure. I mean, so again, with a lot of these principles, it's about trying to get the balance of interests. And the fundamental goal of having a code of principles is to enable to enable the users, the public, the policymakers, the partners who are using the work that fact-checking organizations do, to trust the work. It's an awful lot easier to trust the work when you've got a larger sample, a more representative sample of that work. So we're also take into account the fact that in countries where there is a smaller community of fact-checking organizations, there's perhaps a greater urgency to get new fact-checking organizations in. If there's an election coming up, if there's at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic, so there's an urgency to get new organizations verified. There's also a desire to give the assessors more meat to eat through, a greater quantity of fact checks to test. So it's trying to get that balance right. And so in those countries where there is already a large community, 10 organizations plus, fact checking, there is less urgency to have another new organization. We're absolutely not stopping that, but that in that case, we want to be very confident that the organizations are doing what they're saying they're doing. The easiest way to do that is to give the assessors a bigger chunk of data to look through.
Right. So we have 15 minutes left, and I will try to do my best to give chance to every question, and maybe we can just, have like a flash round of Q&A in the next couple of minutes. So Ferdi, there's this question about the accessibility of the Code of Principles across different languages and different settings. So right now, whatever we have online is only in English.
Right.
And this is a concern. And for the sake of transparency, we have been basically trying to launch a couple of different multiple languages, and it hadn't been possible yet. But can you walk us through the process that we will have with multiple languages in our Code of Principles page?
Right. So currently we're actually translating the Code of Principles, the current website, into several languages. In the works, we have Spanish and Portuguese at the moment, but this is going to expand to several other languages that we are in midst of speaking with translators, which includes Arabic, French, and Portuguese. I said Portuguese already. Those are the main languages we see in the next few months that will be rolling out. But of course, translation is a long period. So we could translate stuff, but it might not.
It's probably more about localization rather than translation.
Yeah, we need to also look at how the translation reflects the Code of Principles. So we have to go through the translations, and so it fits perfectly. And then, of course, there's going to be a process of uploading that to the website. So it's in the works, and hopefully we'll have the first two languages rolled out in the next couple of months.
That's great to hear. It's probably
just one very quick word on that is that, so I mentioned it very briefly, but if it's not clear, one of the things we discussed with the community was asking that the organization, the signatory, once it's approved, agrees produces a summary in its own language of the assessment that's vetted by the assessor, and then puts that on its own site, so that in those languages where we don't have the ability to do this as the IFCN, then we encourage organizations to make the assessment available to their audiences in their own languages. We think that increases the level of trust between them and their audience, because a lot of people don't speak English.
Absolutely. And I mean, for what's worth, all the applications and the assessments are already publicly available on our website.
Right.
And we see, and that might be also useful to also talk about that briefly. So one of the products of the Code of Principles is the badge. So once an organization becomes a verified signature to our Code of Principles, we provide them with the technical code, the HTML code that they can upload to their websites and feature that they are a verified signature to IFCN. And that badge also allows users to reach out to IFCN's website and get access to the applications and the assessments of any given organization. In the next couple of months, we will be conducting a study with the help of with the support of Google to assess the impact of our badge in the eyes of the users. So one of the things that we really want to achieve by this study is to demonstrate the value of our badge on websites and see how users being how users consume that badge, whether they get whether that helps them to the organizations to build trust with their users, and how they can also hold themselves accountable, because the badge also allows users to go to our website and in necessary cases, I mean, fill out a complaint, which also helps the organizations to be accountable before their readers as well. Not that organizations need it, but I think that's a good way to build that feeling of community and solidarity by putting the badge out there. So we hope to share more on this study very soon. But meanwhile, I mean, I think we cannot underscore, or we cannot stress enough how fact checkers in all over the world are having some challenges and troubles just because of the work that they do. Just of today, we are following the news from Brazil. The Congress is voting on a bill which will be regulating the whole quote unquote fake news in the country and putting fact checkers into danger. So there's a question from Gilberto from Lupa, but I think that question can be applied to every fact-checking organization in Brazil, which we have 3 right now, Aos Fatos, Lupa, and Estado. They all have been struggling with the political atmosphere in the country that marginalize fact-checking and also putting them into danger. So the question from Gilberto, I think, is a very important one. I think we can apply this question all around the world, not only limited to Brazil. He's asking, how can a fact-checking organization can become, and I'm quoting him right now, less political while the politician in the country uses disinformation and misinformation as a weapon to shape the rhetoric and also put fact-checkers' jobs in danger. Peter, you have mentioned this in your presentation, but it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, we want fact-checking organizations to be less political, obviously. I mean, they are independent and nonpartisan, but what happens when they operate in a country where the leaders in that country just, spread some misinformation? What happens?
So, I think the first thing to say is that the fact that we have a code of principles doesn't give a shield to people who are working in politically hostile, or doesn't give an impenetrable shield to people who are working in hostile environments. If people want to look at the work that fact-checking organizations do cynically, they will find a way to do that. The point of the change there was an important point which I assumed would come up, so I thought I'd explain it here. One of the points of the change that we made in the Code of Principles, when it was initially produced, it talked about fact-checking organizations not concentrating their work on any one side. And while that is fine, and everybody agrees that that's fine in principle, in country after country after country, you find that the political debate is not that one side in the political debate produces far more information than the other, and whether that's information, accurate information or misinformation, there's a much greater flow from one side. So to fact check one side, both sides equally, makes a nonsense of the fact checking process. So we changed the Code of Principles to declare that the fact-checking organizations should not focus unduly on any one side, and it's a fundamental principle. So if you look through the guidelines, what you'll find is that they say that applicants have to demonstrate to the assessor, and the assessor has to look through that the argument that's made, that they focused on the reach of the claims and the importance or the potential impact of the misinformation if it's untrue. Political debate doesn't neatly fit into a two-party system with each party producing the same amount of information anywhere in the world. I'll give you one an example from the UK. Last year, the political debate that mattered was taking place between the two contenders for the leadership of the ruling party. For weeks and weeks and weeks, the Labour Party said nothing of any significance in UK political debate. The whole debate was within a party. If your argument is that you have to fact check between the two parties, the two main parties, but that's then in fact a 7-party system. So everywhere, every time you look at any country, it breaks down. So the only thing that you can really find less party political and more factual verification system is a verification system based on the reach of the claims. Is it reaching audiences that matter, and the importance of the claim? And that's what we're asking fact checkers. That's what, in fact, that came back very strongly approved by the community as reflecting the context of their countries.
And maybe, I mean, again, one of the things that we probably cannot underscore is that the whole changes, and basically the code itself was also a product of the discussions and conversations among the community, and this whole this review process was also discussed and ratified by the community during the last couple of months, and all feedback we had was, you know, very diverse and rich in terms of what are the challenges in different settings, in different cultures, in different political cultures, and this is becoming like something that we just want to make sure it's not only serving one political culture or one political setting, but it's also applicable in different parts of the world with different political and, you know, social circumstances. So I'm seeing the note that we only have 3 minutes left, and I'm just going to ask Ferdi and Peter to just market and advertise the workshop that we will be doing on Monday during the private track. We have 2 workshops, one addressed for the applicants and one addressed for the assessors, and Ferdi, and after that I will be asking Peter to share his, you know, last words, and then hopefully we will have more participants in those workshops. But what are they going to be about?
Well, if you're in the midst of applying to the Code of Principles, I would say you should definitely watch it. It's going to be, on one end, it's going to be a step-by-step through the application for applicants. And after we complete that we're going to take questions, me and Peter, for the remaining of the session. So it's going to be a very interactive workshop. The same goes for the assessors. If there are assessors out there that I haven't found yet, and if you're interested in becoming an assessor of the IFCN for the Code of Principles, this is your moment to attend that workshop. Reach out to me, and I could send you that link. And again, it's going to be a step-by-step on the assessor's side, how they are going to be approaching the assessment of each application, and then we will talk in a Q&A with me and Peter with the assessors for that session as well. So it's going to be a little, you know, house cleaning and conversation.
Great. I think it's going to be very useful for the applicants as well. And also, it's not only necessarily limited to the near time applicants. I mean, anyone who's interested in the Code of Principles might be also, you know, able to join that. Peter, you will be in those, you know, 2 workshops as well. And since, you know, you will be there as the champions of England with the Liverpool scarf, I believe, we will probably have a couple of Manchester United fans or Chelsea fans or City fans might be joining to that workshop as well. So I think that will be really useful to have a conversation, particularly among how to do fact-checking among rivals, because I think that's going to be an issue that we will be spending some time on to discuss in different countries. Now we see more fact-checking organizations coming from rival backgrounds, rival media houses are operating under the same principles. And anyone who is interested in those principles, Peter who actually is not only IFCN's senior advisor, but he's a mentor and he's a leader to the community. And if there is one or two things that I really feeling blessed about my job here is to be able to work with Peter. So I can't thank him enough for taking the lead in this whole review process with his experience and his wisdom. It's been a pleasure to be able to work with him, both as a former board of advisory board member and also as a senior advisor to in his position at IFCN. So I strongly encourage anyone who is interested in these conversations tuning in for the workshops on Monday. Just go to globalfact7.com and to check out the timing of the session and reach out to us if any questions. And please, Peter, we'll be more than happy to hear from you. And then I think we will be just calling the day off. Well, not the day, but the panel.
Yeah, I mean, so the only thing I'd say is that the idea of the workshop is we want to hear. This is a new review. The review of the code, we did extensive surveys, and so thank you very much to everybody who replied to those. They were long and detailed, we know, but that really helped feed into the process, and I think improve them and make them better applied to the situations people are in. I know there was this discussion the other day about political fact-checking and verification, and are they different, and can the code apply to them, and should the code apply to the training that people do in fact-checking? And so there's lots of questions, and we're not closing the doors to things, we're trying to listen. So the workshops are both about trying to explain the process that we have and trying to listen for ways we can better apply them, solutions we can find to problems people have.
And basically to come up with new questions.
Come up with new questions, and I will, if it's not as hot as it is today, I will be wearing my Liverpool scarf all the way through. It's hot here, it's like 30 degrees.
You'll never walk alone, Peter. You'll never walk alone.
That's it. With the IFCN, you never walk alone.
That's great. I think we cannot find any better way to end this panel. With IFCN, you will never walk alone, especially with people who are dedicated to this field. And today is going to be my last appearance on the Global Fact. So if you allow me, I would like to thank everyone who has been involved in this conference from the beginning to the end, from planning and all the logistics. Ferdi has been a lifesaver. He just joined us recently, but he did a great, big support to pull this together with me, our reporter Harrison, who you will be seeing shortly with the next session, the show and tell session, and my dear colleague and partner in crime, Christina, who will be running the last session of today by noon Eastern time today. And Peter, I think it's been a while we have seen each other, a couple of months, but it was again nice to see you. It's always nice to see you. It's always great to see you. And hope you all enjoy the rest of the Global Fact, the final day of the public track, and see you in the hallway in the Slack channel. And until then, take care.
Goodbye.